When the 7-year-old boy, so small he looked like a ghost haunting clothes meant for a healthier child, finally found the courage to act, he chose the biggest man in the room. He walked on silent, worn-out sneakers to the table where a mountain of leather and denim sat hunched over a slice of cherry pie. The boy stopped, looked up into the weathered face of a man who seemed carved from granite and road dust, and whispered 5 words that broke the diner's greasy spoon calm forever. "I haven't eaten in 4 days." For the biker known as Sticks, the clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation faded into nothing. The world stopped on the axis of that small, desperate voice, setting off a chain of events that would turn a routine Tuesday afternoon into a citywide manhunt and bring 80 angels on iron horses to the gates of a suburban hell. The Iron Skillet Diner was a relic, a long, narrow box of chrome and cracked vinyl, squatting just off the interstate. It smelled of old coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet aroma of decades of syrup soaked into the floorboards. It was a place of transit, a temporary haven for truckers chasing deadlines and travelers who were lost and did not know it yet. For the Sons of Odin Motorcycle Club, it was neutral ground, a place to grab a meal without any trouble. Frank Miller, known to every soul in the club as Sticks, sat in his usual booth. At 52, he was a formidable presence. He stood 6'4", with a barrel chest and arms covered in the intricate faded ink of a life lived hard. A thick, graying beard cascaded down his chest, partially obscuring the death's head patch on his leather vest. But his eyes, a surprisingly pale blue, were calm and observant. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much. Before he was Sticks, he was Fireman Miller, a 25-year veteran of the city's busiest engine company. He had pulled people from twisted metal and carried children out of smoke-filled rooms. He knew, better than most, the look of fear. He was halfway through his pie when they came in. A man and a woman, both thin and wired, with the kind of frantic energy that made the air around them feel static. Between them, held tightly by the wrist, was the boy. He was a whisper of a child, with dark, hollow eyes set in a face too pale, and a mop of brown hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in a week. His clothes, a faded cartoon t-shirt and jeans with holes in the knees, hung off his skeletal frame. They slid into the booth directly across from Sticks. The parents immediately started arguing in low, vicious hisses, their attention fixed on a crumpled piece of paper the man had pulled from his pocket. They didn't look at the menu. They didn't look at their son. The boy, Leo, just sat there. He stared at the salt shaker on the table, his small hands clasped in his lap. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak. He was unnaturally still, a stillness Sticks recognized. It was the stillness of a small animal trying to make itself invisible to predators. Sticks took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving the family. The waitress came over, a tired woman named Flo, and the parents ordered 2 black coffees, nothing else. Flo looked at the boy, her expression softening. "And for the little guy, a Coke? Some fries?" "He's not hungry," the woman snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. The man shot the boy a look so full of venom that Sticks felt his own hands curl into fists under the table. "He ate before we left." Flo retreated, her professional smile faltering. Sticks knew it was a lie. He knew it the way he knew which floorboards would give way in a burning house. The boy's hollow cheeks, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted towards Sticks' half-eaten pie. It was a language of neglect Sticks had learned long ago. He had seen that look in the eyes of children he'd carried out of squalid apartments, their parents passed out in the next room. He knew what a hungry kid looked like. This was more than hungry. This was starvation. For 10 minutes, Sticks watched. He saw the father grip the boy's arm, his knuckles turning white, when the child dared to look around the diner. He saw the mother push the boy's head down when he tried to meet her gaze. They were monsters hiding in plain sight, cocooned in the anonymity of a public place. Other patrons saw a family. Sticks saw a victim and his captors. The father finally stood up, muttering something about the restroom. He gave the boy one last threatening glare before disappearing down the short hall. The mother pulled out her phone, her thumb scrolling furiously, her face illuminated by the cold blue light. She was in another world, a world where her son did not exist. This was the moment. The boy saw his opening. He looked across the aisle, his dark eyes locking with Stick's pale blue ones. In that gaze, Stick saw a silent plea, a desperate question. "Do you see me?" Stix gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the invitation the boy needed. He slid out of the booth, a tiny shadow detaching itself from the darkness. He walked the few feet to Stix's table, his movements furtive and quick. He stopped beside the biker's arm, so close Stix could feel the faint, desperate heat coming off his small body. He leaned in, his breath a cool puff of air against Stix's ear. "I haven't eaten in 4 days." The words were barely audible, but they landed in Stix's soul like a sledgehammer. Every instinct, every bit of training, every scar on his heart from a lifetime of witnessing tragedy roared to life. The pie turned to ash in his mouth. The coffee went bitter. The low hum of the diner became a screaming siren in his head. This was a fire, and he was the only one there to put it out. The father was coming back. Stix could see his reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. He had maybe 5 seconds. He didn't hesitate. He looked down at the boy, Leo, and gave him another slow nod. "I hear you," he said, his voice a low rumble that was meant only for the child. "You stay right behind me." Flo was passing by with a fresh pot of coffee. Stix flagged her down. He pulled a crumpled $50 bill from his wallet and pressed it into her hand, closing her fingers around it. His eyes were flinty, serious. "Pancakes," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "A burger, a milkshake, whatever he wants. Bring it all." Flo looked from the money to the boy hiding behind Stix's massive frame, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. "And call 911, Stix added, his voice dropping even lower. "Tell the sheriff's department there's a possible child endangerment situation at the Iron Skillet. Tell them to hurry." Flo nodded, her face pale, and rushed toward the kitchen phone. At that exact moment, the father arrived back at the table. He saw the empty booth, then saw his son cowering behind the biker. His face, already pinched and mean, twisted into a mask of pure rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snarled, jabbing a finger toward Stix. "Get away from my kid." Stix rose slowly from his booth. He felt like an old engine turning over, all creaking joints and stored power. He unfolded to his full height, casting a long shadow over the smaller man. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a human wall between the predator and his prey. "You deaf?" the man spat, his voice rising. "I said you're in our way." "He's hungry," Stix said. The words were flat, cold, and heavy as iron. "He's going to eat." The mother finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide and panicked. "What's going on? Let's go," she hissed at her husband. The man tried to step around Stix to grab the boy. Stix shifted his weight, blocking him effortlessly. "I don't think so." The confrontation had silenced the entire diner. Forks hung suspended in midair. Conversations died. The cook, a burly man named Gus, appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron and holding a heavy iron skillet like a weapon. Every eye was on the standoff. With his left hand, hidden from the father's view, Stix pulled out his phone. He navigated to his MC group chat, a thread that contained the numbers of every patched member of the Sons of Odin. He typed a single word and hit send. Trouble. Then he put the phone away. The father, seeing he was physically outmatched and now the center of unwanted attention, tried a different tactic. "I'm calling the cops. This lunatic is trying to kidnap my son." "They're already on their way," Stix said calmly. The man's bravado evaporated, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. He grabbed his wife's arm. "We're leaving. Now. Leo, come on." The boy just pressed himself deeper into the leather of Stix's vest, his small hands clutching the back of it. He wasn't moving. Just then, the double doors of the diner swung open. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped inside, their presence immediately changing the dynamics of the room. They were professionals. Their eyes swept the scene, taking in the massive biker, the terrified child, the frantic parents, and the silent, watching patrons. "We got a call," the older deputy said, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. "What's the situation here?" The father immediately launched into a tirade. "This biker freak is harassing my family. He tried to lure my son away. Arrest him." The deputy looked at Styx, who remained silent. He then looked down at the boy, who was still hiding. The deputy's gaze was patient, kind. He had seen this scene before, in 100 different forms. Flo came rushing out from the kitchen. "He's lying," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "That little boy came to him. He said he was hungry. The parents didn't order him any food." The deputy's eyes narrowed, focusing on the parents. He took a step forward. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to need you to come outside with me so we can have a chat." "We haven't done anything wrong," the woman shrieked, her composure finally shattering. As the deputies escorted the protesting parents outside, a second patrol car pulled up. A female officer, Sergeant Davis, came inside. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Leo. Her voice was soft. "Hey there, sport," she said gently. "I'm Officer Carroll. Are you okay?" Leo peeked out from behind Styx's leg. He gave a small, hesitant nod. At that moment, Gus the cook arrived from the kitchen with a huge plate piled high with fluffy pancakes, swimming in butter and syrup. He placed it carefully on Styx's table. "On the house," he grunted. The boy's eyes fixed on the food with an intensity that was heartbreaking. He hadn't seen a plate like that in his life. He looked from the pancakes to Sergeant Davis, then up at Styx, as if asking for permission. "Go on, kid," Styx rumbled. "It's all yours." Slowly, Leo climbed onto the vinyl seat of the booth and began to eat. He ate with a desperate, frantic hunger that confirmed everything Styx had suspected. He didn't use a fork at first, just grabbing pieces of pancake with his bare hands and stuffing them into his mouth. Sergeant Davis watched him, her expression a mixture of pity and professional anger. She looked up at Styx. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that went beyond the call of duty. "You have no idea." "I think I do," Styx replied quietly. Outside, the situation with the parents had devolved into screaming and accusations. A social worker from Child Protective Services arrived, a calm, capable woman named Maria. She came inside and spoke with Sergeant Davis in low tones, her eyes occasionally flicking over to the small boy, methodically working his way through the mountain of food. When he had finally eaten his fill, Maria approached the booth. She had a teddy bear in her hand. Leo was eventually coaxed out of the diner, clutching the bear in one hand and a takeaway box with the burger in the other. He was safe. He was fed. He was free. Before he got into the social worker's car, he stopped. He turned around and looked at the giant biker standing on the diner steps. For a moment, he just stared. Then, he ran. He ran back to Styx and wrapped his tiny arms around the biker's massive leg, hugging it with all his might. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Styx felt a lump form in his throat. He reached down and awkwardly, gently, patted the boy's head. "You be good, kid," he managed to say, his voice thick. Leo looked up at him one last time, his eyes, for the first time, not filled with fear but with something else. Gratitude. Hope. He then let go and walked back to Maria's car, climbing into the back seat without a backward glance at the life that was now over. The lead deputy came over to Styx, pulling off his hat and wiping his brow. "Frank," he said, using Styx's real name. They knew each other from the old days. "Our guys are taking the parents downtown. Their story fell apart in about 30 seconds. Turns out there are warrants for them in 2 other states. Neglect, shoplifting, parole violations." He sighed, looking at the departing car. "We've had calls about that house. Neighbors hearing things. But we could never get enough for a warrant. You just gave us the key." Styx just nodded, watching the taillights disappear down the road. The immediate fire was out, but he knew the house was still standing, and he had a feeling it was filled with smoke. The one-word text Styx had sent was a flare in the night for the Sons of Odin. Trouble wasn't just a call for help, it was a summons. It meant one of their own was in a situation that required the full weight and presence of the club. It was a call to arms reserved for the most dire circumstances. His chapter president, a man called Bear, had received the message while wrenching on his Harley. He didn't ask questions. He put down his tools, sent the message, "Styx, iron skillet, now," to the chapter, and was on his bike in under a minute. But he also knew Styx. He knew Styx didn't call for backup unless the trouble was deep. so Bear forwarded the message to the presidents of the 3 neighboring Sons of Odin charters. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From workshops, construction sites, bars, and quiet suburban homes, men dropped what they were doing. They pulled on their leather vests, their cuts, which were more than just clothing. They were a uniform, a statement of allegiance. They straddled their iron horses, the roar of V-twin engines shattering the afternoon peace across 4 counties. They rode. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the asphalt, a silent army had gathered. They didn't converge on the diner. Styx had sent a follow-up text with an address. The address the deputies had confirmed belonged to Leo's parents. It was a small, dilapidated rental house on the frayed edge of town, a place of peeling paint and overgrown weeds. 80 bikers, 80 gleaming machines of chrome and steel lined the quiet residential street. They came not for violence, but for presence. They parked their bikes and stood there, a silent, intimidating legion of leather-clad guardians. They formed a loose perimeter around the house, their arms crossed, their faces grim. They were a visible promise that whatever darkness was inside that house would be dragged into the light, and that no one would interfere with the process. The police, who were already on scene preparing to execute the emergency warrant they'd secured thanks to Leo's testimony, were stunned by the sight. But Sergeant Davis understood. She walked over to Styx, who now stood at the head of his brothers. "You didn't have to do this, Frank," she said, though her voice was thick with appreciation. "Yes, we did," Styx replied, his eyes fixed on the house. "We're here to make sure the job gets done right. We're here to bear witness." Their presence kept the street clear. It kept nosy neighbors at a distance. It sent a powerful, unspoken message to anyone connected to the couple inside that house. The cavalry had arrived, and it rode for the boy. What the police found inside that house horrified even the most seasoned officers. It was not just a house of neglect. It was a hub for criminal activity. There were drugs, stolen goods, and evidence that Leo was not the only child who had suffered within those walls. Styx's intervention at the diner had not just saved one boy. It had cracked open a criminal enterprise that had been operating under the town's nose. The story exploded. The local news called them the Biker Angels. The image of 80 stoic men standing vigil while police dismantled a house of horrors became a local legend. The Sons of Odin, a group the town had long regarded with suspicion and a little fear, were suddenly seen in a new light. They were not outlaws. They were protectors. The incident changed the club. It gave them a new purpose. A month later, Styx and Bear established a new charity arm of their chapter, Leo's Pantry. They converted an old storage space at their clubhouse into a food bank and resource center for at-risk children and families. They ran toy drives at Christmas and school supply drives in the fall. The 80 men who had stood vigil that night became the charity's first and most dedicated volunteers. They traded their tough exteriors for aprons and stocking shelves, their intimidating presence now a source of comfort for the community's most vulnerable. 10 years passed. The Iron Skillet diner hadn't changed. The vinyl was a little more cracked, the smell of coffee a little more ingrained in the walls, but it was the same. Styx sat in the same booth, though he himself had changed. His beard was more white than gray, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. But the calm, watchful look in those eyes remained. Across from him sat a 17-year-old boy. He was tall and lean, with a confident smile and the clear, bright eyes of a kid who knew he was loved. He was the star quarterback on the high school football team and had a near-perfect academic record. This was Leo. He had been adopted by a wonderful couple a year after his rescue. They had given him stability, therapy, and unconditional love. But he never lost contact with the man who had saved him. Styx was not Frank to him. He was Uncle Styx. The Sons of Odin had become his sprawling, unconventional family. He had 80 leather-clad uncles who had taught him how to fix an engine, how to stand up for himself, and how to treat people with respect. They attended every one of his football games, a rumbling, cheering section of leather and denim that intimidated every opposing team. Leo slid a stack of college brochures across the table. "I'm thinking about this one," he said, tapping a university known for its social work program. I think I want to do what Maria did, for other kids." Styx looked at the brochure, then at the young man in front of him. and his heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. He saw no trace of the terrified spectral child he had met in this very spot a decade ago. He saw a strong, compassionate survivor who was determined to turn his own pain into a source of healing for others. "That's a good choice, kid," Styx said, his voice rough with emotion. "You'd be good at that." Leo was quiet for a moment, stirring his milkshake with a straw. "Uncle Styx," he said, his voice soft, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just finished your pie and left that day?" Styx considered the question. He thought about the darkness that had been allowed to fester in that house, about the life Leo would have had, and the lives of the other children who might have been pulled into that nightmare. "I don't think about it," Styx said honestly, "because it wasn't an option. Seeing you, that was not something a man walks away from." Leo looked up, his eyes meeting the biker's. The gratitude he felt was a vast, quiet thing, too big for words, but he tried anyway. "Thank you," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Thank you for seeing me." Styx just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He motioned for Flo, now the owner of the diner, to bring them another slice of cherry pie to share. In the quiet comfort of the old diner, the protector and the boy he had rescued sat together, not as a hero and a victim, but as family. A family forged not by blood, but by a single whispered plea for help, and the profound, life-altering decision to listen. One man's choice to pay attention had not only saved a child, but had redeemed a brotherhood and healed a piece of a broken world.